The stagecoach wheels locked against ice as the horses screamed their terror into wind that could strip flesh from bone. And inside the cabin, Olivia Thompson clutched her carpetbag against her chest while praying to a god who seemed very far away in this howling white hell of 1884 Montana winter. She had left Philadelphia 3 weeks ago with nothing but her sister's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, $17 sewn into her corset, and a single daguerreotype of the man who had answered her advertisement in the matrimonial newspaper. Samuel Harrison, rancher, age 26, seeking a wife of good character and strong constitution. The photograph showed a serious-faced man with dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. And Olivia had studied that image every night on the train west, trying to imagine what words they might speak to each other, what kind of life they might build together in a place she could not even picture. The stagecoach lurched violently to the left, and Olivia heard the driver shouting something she could not understand over the wind's fury. They were supposed to arrive in Silver Ridge, Montana before sunset, but the blizzard had caught them 2 hours outside of town, and now the sky was the same dead white as the earth, and Olivia could not tell if they were even still on the road. "Hold on." The driver's voice cut through the storm just before the stagecoach tilted at an impossible angle, and then they were sliding, tumbling, the world spinning in a chaos of white and darkness, and the taste of copper fear in her mouth. When the motion stopped, Olivia found herself wedged against the side of the coach, which was now the bottom, her head ringing and something warm trickling down her temple. She touched her forehead, and her glove came away dark with blood. The wind shrieked through a crack in the door, and snow was already accumulating inside the cabin. "Driver," she called out, her voice thin and lost. "Sir, are you there?" No answer came except the wind's constant howl. Olivia pushed against the door above her head, but it would not budge. She was trapped in an overturned stagecoach in a blizzard that showed no signs of stopping, and no one knew exactly where they were. The driver had said something about taking a shortcut to avoid the worst of the weather, but clearly that decision had been catastrophic. She tried to think rationally, despite the panic clawing at her throat. The cold was already seeping through her traveling dress and wool coat. She had read stories of people freezing to death in winter storms, how they simply fell asleep and never woke again. She pulled her carpetbag closer and extracted her extra shawl, wrapping it around her shoulders and head. Then she began to pray again, not the formal prayers of her childhood, but a desperate bargaining with whatever force might be listening in this frozen wasteland. Time became meaningless in the white darkness. Olivia drifted in and out of consciousness, dreaming of her sister's warm kitchen in Philadelphia, the smell of bread baking, the sound of children laughing in the street outside. When she woke, the bleeding on her forehead had stopped, but her fingers and toes felt distant and strange, as if they belonged to someone else. She was thinking that this was a very undignified way to die, frozen in a wedding dress that was not even originally hers, on the way to marry a man she had never met, when she heard a sound that was not the wind. Voices. Men shouting to each other, the thud of hooves on snow-packed ground. "Here!" Olivia screamed, pounding on the side of the overturned coach. "I am in here. Please, I am alive." The sounds grew louder, and then suddenly there were hands wrenching at the door, strong gloved hands that tore it open and let in a blast of snow and gray daylight. A face appeared in the opening, made strange by the scarf wrapped around the lower half and the hat pulled low, but the eyes were visible, and they were dark and intense and looking right at her. "Can you move?" the man shouted over the wind. "I think so," Olivia called back. "Then reach up. I will pull you out." She stood on unsteady legs and stretched her arms toward the opening. The man's hands locked around her wrists with a grip that was almost painful in its strength, and then she was being hauled up and out of the wreckage into the full force of the blizzard. She would have fallen immediately, but the man caught her against his chest, one arm around her waist, and she felt the solid warmth of him through all the layers of wool and leather. "Can you ride?" he shouted into her ear. "I do not know," she answered honestly. She had never been on a horse in her life. "Then you will ride with me, Henry," he called to someone Olivia could not see through the blowing snow. "The driver is dead. We will have to come back for him when the storm clears. Dead." The driver was dead and she was alive, and this stranger was lifting her onto a horse that seemed impossibly tall. And then he swung up behind her and wrapped one arm around her middle while the other hand held the reins. She felt the horse turn and begin to move through snow that came up past its knees, and the man behind her was a wall against the wind, sheltering her with his body. "Who are you?" Olivia managed to ask through chattering teeth. "Samuel Harrison," the man said. "And I think you must be Miss Olivia Thompson, though this is not exactly how I planned for us to meet." Despite everything, despite the cold and the fear and the death she had just barely escaped, Olivia felt a wild laugh bubble up in her chest. "Nor I, Mr. Harrison. I had hoped to arrive in somewhat better condition." She felt rather than heard his answering laugh, a rumble against her back. "The best things come in storms," he said. "My father used to say that. I never knew what he meant until just now." They rode through the white hell for what seemed like hours, but was probably less than one. Olivia lost all feeling in her extremities and started to shake so violently that Samuel pulled her back harder against his chest and opened his coat to wrap it around her as well. The intimacy of it should have scandalized her, but she was too cold to care about propriety. And besides, they were going to be married anyway. Or at least that had been the plan before the stagecoach crashed and the world turned into ice and wind. Finally, she saw dark shapes emerging from the whiteness. Buildings. A barn and a house, rough built but solid, with smoke rising from the chimney to be torn away by the wind. Samuel guided the horse right up to the front door of the house and then dismounted, reaching up to pull Olivia down. Her legs would not hold her and she collapsed into his arms. "Henry, take care of the horses," Samuel called to the other man, who Olivia could now see was older, perhaps 50, with a gray beard crusted with ice. "I need to get her warm." He carried her through the door into a single large room that was blessedly warm from a fire roaring in a stone fireplace. A rough table and chairs occupied one corner, a stove another, and there was a bed against the far wall. Samuel set her down in a chair close to the fire and immediately began removing her snow-caked outer garments. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes," he said, his voice matter of fact but not unkind. "Do you have dry things?" "In my carpet bag," Olivia said, and then realized. "It is still in the stagecoach," Samuel swore quietly. "Then you will have to wear some of mine until we can retrieve it. Can you undress yourself or do you need help?" Olivia's face flamed despite the cold. "I can manage, I think. I will turn my back. There is a screen in the corner if you can make it that far. Call out if you need assistance." He turned away and Olivia forced her shaking hands to work at the buttons of her dress. Everything was damp and her fingers felt like clubs, but eventually she managed to remove her traveling dress, her petticoats, her stockings. Her corset was still dry thanks to her wool dress, but she removed it anyway because the wet had seeped through in places. She stood in only her chemise and drawers when Samuel appeared at the screen's edge with his eyes averted, holding out a flannel shirt and a pair of wool trousers. "These will be too large, but they are dry and warm," he said. She took them and dressed quickly. her skin prickling painfully as circulation began to return. The shirt hung to her knees, and the trousers required rolling up several times and tying tight with the belt Samuel also provided. But they were indeed warm and smelled of wood smoke and something else, something masculine and not unpleasant. When she emerged from behind the screen, Samuel was stirring something in a pot on the stove. He looked up and his eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in his clothes, but he only nodded and gestured to the chair by the fire. "Sit. I am making coffee and there is stew left from last night. You need to eat and drink something hot." Olivia sank into the chair and held her hands out to the fire. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the reality of her situation began to settle over her. She was alone in a house with a man she had never met, wearing his clothes, having agreed through letters to marry him. The stagecoach driver was dead. A blizzard raged outside. And this was the man who would be her husband. This stern-faced rancher with strong hands and dark eyes who had pulled her from the wreckage and brought her to safety. Samuel brought her a cup of steaming coffee and a bowl of stew, and she wrapped her hands around the cup's warmth before drinking. The coffee was strong and bitter and absolutely wonderful. The stew was simple, meat and potatoes and carrots, but she ate it like it was a feast, suddenly ravenous. Samuel sat down across from her with his own cup of coffee and studied her face. "You have a cut on your forehead. It should be cleaned." "It has stopped bleeding," Olivia said. Nonetheless, he rose and returned with a basin of water and a clean cloth. He knelt beside her chair and gently tilted her face toward the firelight. His touch was careful as he cleaned the wound, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. This close, she could see that his eyes were not just dark but a deep brown with flecks of amber, and his face was weathered by sun and wind but handsome in a rough, lived-in way. He was perhaps a few years older than his photograph suggested, or perhaps this land simply aged people faster. "It is not deep," he said after examining the cut. "It should heal without scarring." "Thank you for saving my life," Olivia said quietly. "If you had not come looking for me." "I knew the stage was due this afternoon. When the blizzard came in, I got worried and rode out with Henry to see if we could intercept it. I am only sorry we did not reach you sooner." His jaw tightened. Bill Carter, the driver, was a good man. He leaves behind a wife and 3 children. "I am sorry," Olivia said, and meant it. She had barely spoken to the driver, but he had been kind to her at the last stop, helping her with her bag and assuring her that Silver Ridge was a good town full of decent people. Samuel nodded and rose, taking the basin away. When he returned, he sat down again and wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, staring into the fire. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. Olivia studied him surreptitiously. He was taller than she had expected, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean build of someone who did hard physical labor every day. His hair was dark brown and slightly too long, curling at his collar, and he had not shaved in a day or 2. He wore practical clothes, work pants and a flannel shirt and boots that had seen hard use. "I suppose we should talk," Samuel said finally. "This is not how I expected this day to go either." "You expected a wife to arrive in good weather and good spirits, not half frozen and wearing your clothes," Olivia said. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Something like that. Though I confess I did not know what to expect. Your letters were very proper." "As were yours." "Yes." He cleared his throat. "I should tell you that you are under no obligation to go through with our arrangement. Given the circumstances, I would understand if you wished to return to Philadelphia as soon as the weather clears." Olivia considered this. It would be the sensible thing, perhaps, to go back to the safety of her sister's house, to her old life of helping with the children, and doing mending for the neighbors to earn her keep. But she had left Philadelphia precisely because she did not want that life anymore, because she was tired of being dependent on her sister's charity, because at 23 she wanted something of her own, even if that something was a stranger in a strange land. "I did not come all this way to turn back at the first difficulty," she said, "unless you have changed your mind about wanting a wife." Samuel looked at her directly then, and she saw something in his eyes that might have been relief. "No, I have not changed my mind. But I think we should be honest with each other from the start. This ranch is not an easy life. The winters are brutal, as you have seen. The summers are short, and the work is constant. I have 200 head of cattle and land that stretches for 5 miles in every direction, but that does not mean I am a wealthy man. I live simply. I work hard, and I am not always good company." "I do not expect easy," Olivia said. "I expect honest work and a place that is mine. I can cook and clean and sew. I can read and write and cipher. I am not delicate despite how I must look right now. I may not know anything about ranching, but I can learn. Can you handle loneliness? The nearest neighbor is 3 miles away. The town is 8. In the winter we might go weeks without seeing another soul besides each other. I have been lonely in the middle of Philadelphia surrounded by people," Olivia said. "At least here the loneliness would be honest." Samuel studied her for a long moment and then nodded slowly. "All right then. We will give this a try. The preacher is in town, but we cannot get there until the storm clears. It might be several days. In the meantime, I will sleep in the barn with Henry. You can have the house to yourself." "That seems impractical," Olivia said. "It is freezing outside and the barn cannot be very warm. I can sleep behind the screen and you can sleep in your own bed. We are both adults and we are going to be married anyway. People in town will talk if they know we shared a house before the wedding. People in town will talk regardless. And besides, no one needs to know. I will not tell them if you will not." Samuel looked like he wanted to argue, but then he glanced toward the window where snow was still falling thick and fast, and he nodded. "All right, but the screen stays up and you tell me if you are uncomfortable at any time." "Agreed." The blizzard raged for 3 days and 3 nights, and in that time, Olivia Thompson and Samuel Harrison learned each other in the strange intimacy of forced proximity. They were careful to maintain propriety, dressing and undressing behind the screen, averting eyes, keeping conversation somewhat formal. But there was only so much formality possible when sharing a single room, eating meals together, sitting by the fire in the evenings. Olivia discovered that Samuel was a man of few words, but what he said was always thoughtful. He had been born in Missouri and came to Montana 6 years ago to start his ranch, working first for another rancher to learn the trade and save money. His father had died when Samuel was 15 and his mother 2 years later, leaving him and a younger sister who had married and moved to Oregon. He wrote to his sister every month and received letters back that he clearly treasured, reading them multiple times. Samuel learned that Olivia had grown up in Philadelphia as the younger of 2 sisters, that their parents had died in a cholera outbreak when Olivia was 17, that she had lived with her married sister Margaret and Margaret's husband Peter for the past 6 years. She did not say explicitly that she had felt like a burden, an extra mouth to feed and body to house, but Samuel seemed to understand anyway. She told him about the books she loved to read, borrowed from the lending library, and how she had always wondered what lay beyond the city streets. She had never imagined herself as particularly brave or adventurous, but something in his advertisement had called to her, some promise of a different kind of life. They cooked together, Olivia learning how to use the cast iron stove efficiently, Samuel showing her how he liked his coffee strong and his bacon crispy. They played cards in the evenings, simple games that required little more than a deck and some pennies to serve as stakes. Samuel won more often than not, but Olivia held her own, and he seemed pleased by her competitiveness. On the second night, when the fire had burned low and they were both half asleep in their chairs, Samuel told her about the first winter he had spent in Montana, alone in a one-room cabin even smaller than this house, watching his carefully saved cattle die one by one in a cold snap that lasted a week. He had nearly given up then, nearly sold what was left and gone back to Missouri to find work in a factory or a mine. But then the spring had come and the land had turned green and gold, and he had understood why people stayed here despite the hardships, for the beauty and the space, and the feeling that you were building something that mattered. Olivia told him about the day she had decided to answer his advertisement, how she had been sitting in her sister's parlor mending a torn shirt for the 100th time, and suddenly could not bear the thought of another year passing in the same way. She had gone to the lending library and found a matrimonial newspaper and read through the advertisements, most of them from miners or trappers looking for women who could cook and clean, the language blunt and transactional. But Samuel's had been different. He had written about the land and the sky and how he wanted someone to share it all with, not just a housekeeper but a partner. She had answered that same day and then spent the next 3 weeks waiting for his reply, hardly daring to hope. On the third day, the wind finally stopped and the snow tapered to occasional flurries. Samuel and Henry dug paths from the house to the barn and then hitched up the horse to a makeshift sled to go retrieve Olivia's carpetbag and the driver's body from the overturned stagecoach. They were gone for several hours, and when they returned, Samuel's face was grim. He brought her bag inside, crusted with snow but intact, and she went through it carefully. Most of her things had survived, including the altered wedding dress and the daguerreotype of Samuel that now seemed like an artifact from a different lifetime. That evening, Samuel said they would ride into Silver Ridge the next day if the weather held. He needed to report Bill Carter's death to the sheriff and make arrangements for the body to be returned to his family, and they would see the preacher and get married if Olivia still wanted to. "I do," she said. "Do you?" "Yes," Samuel said, and the single word held a weight of certainty that made something warm unfold in Olivia's chest. She barely slept that night, lying behind the screen in the large bed that would soon be hers to share with Samuel, listening to his breathing from his bedroll by the fire. He had insisted on giving her the bed once she arrived, sleeping instead on the floor despite her protests. In a few hours they would ride to town and speak vows before a preacher, and she would become Olivia Harrison, wife of a Montana rancher, and the life she had imagined in Philadelphia would become real. The morning dawned cold and clear, the sky a painful blue and the snow glittering like diamonds as far as the eye could see. Olivia dressed carefully in her wedding dress behind the screen, the cream-colored silk whispering around her legs, the lace collar high at her throat. It had been her sister's dress, and before that her mother's, altered and updated for each generation, and Olivia felt the weight of that history as she fastened the tiny buttons. She had no mirror, but she pinned her dark hair up as best she could and pinched her cheeks to bring color to them. When she emerged, Samuel was standing by the fire in clean clothes, dark trousers and a white shirt and a black jacket that looked new. He turned at the sound of her step and his eyes went wide. "You look beautiful," he said, and the simple honesty of it brought heat to her face. "Thank you." "You look very handsome." They stood there for a moment, suddenly shy with each other, and then Samuel cleared his throat and offered his arm. "Shall we?" The ride to Silver Ridge took over an hour, the horses moving slowly through deep snow. Henry had stayed behind to tend to the ranch, and it was just the two of them on horseback. Olivia riding behind Samuel again with her arms around his waist and the wedding dress tucked up to keep it from dragging. The town appeared gradually, a collection of wood frame buildings strung along a single main street, smoke rising from chimneys, the smell of wood smoke and horses and humanity. Samuel stopped first at the sheriff's office, a small building with a faded sign. He helped Olivia down and they went inside together. The sheriff was a lean man with a gray mustache who listened gravely to Samuel's account of finding the overturned stagecoach and the dead driver. He made notes and asked questions and promised to send men out to retrieve the body and notify the family. Then his eyes went to Olivia in her wedding dress, and his expression softened. "This must be your intended," he said. "Sam, you did not tell me she was so pretty." "Sheriff Taylor, this is Miss Olivia Thompson, lately of Philadelphia." "Olivia, this is John Taylor. He keeps what passes for law and order in Silver Ridge." "A pleasure, Miss Thompson. And welcome to Montana, though I hear you got quite the introduction." "That was a bad storm, one of the worst I have seen in years." "Mr. Harrison saved my life," Olivia said. "I owe him everything." "Well, you are marrying him, so I would say that makes you even," the sheriff said with a smile. "The preacher is probably at the church right now." "It is just down the street, the building with the white steeple." They found the church easily, a small structure that looked like it might seat 50 people on a crowded Sunday. The preacher was a middle-aged man with kind eyes who introduced himself as Reverend Martin. When Samuel explained that they had come to be married, the Reverend looked at Olivia searchingly. "Miss Thompson, are you entering this marriage of your own free will?" he asked. "No one is forcing you or coercing you in any way. I am here by my own choice," Olivia said firmly. "Mr. Harrison and I have corresponded for several months, and we have an understanding. And you are aware that marriage is a sacred bond, not to be entered into lightly or dissolved easily." "I am aware." The Reverend nodded, apparently satisfied. "Then let us proceed. Do you have witnesses?" Samuel went back out to the street and returned a few minutes later with the sheriff and a woman who introduced herself as Martha Chen, the owner of the general store. She was perhaps 40, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner, but she smiled at Olivia and said, "It is about time Sam Harrison found himself a wife. He has been alone out on that ranch too long." The ceremony was brief and simple. They stood before the altar while Reverend Martin read from his prayer book, the words familiar and strange at once. Samuel's hand was warm and solid when he took hers, and his voice was steady when he repeated the vows. Olivia's voice shook only slightly when she promised to love and honor and cherish this man she barely knew, this stranger who had become her husband in the space of a few spoken words. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Martin said. "Samuel, you may kiss your bride." Samuel leaned down and pressed his lips to Olivia's in a kiss that was chaste and brief, but still made her heart race. His mouth was warm, and when he pulled back his eyes held something she could not quite name, something that made her breath catch. They signed the marriage certificate, and the witnesses signed as well, and then it was done. Olivia Thompson was now Olivia Harrison, wife of a Montana rancher, and there was no going back. Martha insisted they come to the general store for coffee and cake, and Olivia found herself sitting in the back room surrounded by barrels of flour and sugar, while Martha plied her with questions about Philadelphia and the journey west. The older woman was friendly but direct, and Olivia got the sense that she was being evaluated, judged for her worthiness as Samuel's wife and as a new member of this small community. "You will have to come to the church social next month," Martha said. "All the ladies will want to meet you. And if you need anything at all, you come see me. The general store carries just about everything, and what I do not have I can order from Helena." "Thank you," Olivia said. "That is very kind." "Sam is a good man," Martha said, lowering her voice so that only Olivia could hear. "Samuel was outside talking to the sheriff about something. He has had some hard years, but he has never let it make him bitter. You could do a lot worse." "I know," Olivia said, and realized she meant it. They left Silver Ridge in the early afternoon, Samuel having purchased supplies including coffee and flour and sugar, and a thick wool coat for Olivia that actually fit her properly. The ride back to the ranch seemed shorter than the ride out, and when the house came into view, Olivia felt a strange sense of coming home, even though she had only been there 3 days. Henry met them outside the barn and congratulated them on the marriage. He had made a simple supper of beans and cornbread, and the 3 of them ate together, while Henry told stories about the early days of the ranch, when it had been just him and Samuel and 50 head of cattle, and more hope than sense. He was a good storyteller, his lined face animated, and Olivia found herself laughing at his descriptions of various disasters narrowly averted. After supper, Henry excused himself to the barn, saying something about a horse that needed checking on, but Olivia suspected he was simply giving them privacy. She and Samuel cleaned up the dishes together in a silence that grew more charged with each passing moment. The sun had set, and the room was lit only by firelight and a single oil lamp, casting everything in warm, golden tones. "I should hang a curtain," Samuel said suddenly, "to give you more privacy behind the screen." "That would be nice," Olivia agreed. Then, because the tension was becoming unbearable and someone had to address it, "Samuel, we are married now. You do not have to sleep on the floor." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Olivia, I do not expect anything from you that you are not ready to give. We may be married in the eyes of the law and the church, but we are still strangers in many ways. We can take our time getting to know each other." She appreciated his consideration, but also felt a flicker of frustration. "I am not some delicate flower who will shatter at a touch. I know what marriage entails. I am not afraid." "I am," Samuel said quietly. "I am afraid of rushing things and making you regret your decision to come here. You have already been through so much in the past few days." Olivia crossed the room until she stood directly in front of him. She was not a tall woman, barely reaching his shoulder, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I do not regret anything. I chose to answer your advertisement. I chose to board that train and travel 1,000 miles to a place I had never seen. I chose to marry you even though we had only spent 3 days together. I am not in the habit of making choices I regret." Samuel looked down at her, his eyes searching her face. "You are braver than you think," he said. "Perhaps you are more cautious than you think," she countered. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it from serious to almost boyish. "Perhaps I am." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. The touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. Then he leaned down and kissed her again, and this kiss was nothing like the chaste brush of lips in the church. This kiss was deep and searching, his mouth moving against hers with a hunger that stole her breath. She gripped his shoulders to steady herself and kissed him back with an eagerness that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Samuel rested his forehead against hers, his hands on her waist, and she could feel the rapid beat of his heart. "I do not want to hurt you," he said. "You will not," she whispered. "I trust you." He pulled back to look at her one more time, and whatever he saw in her face must have convinced him because he nodded and took her hand and led her to the bed. They undressed each other slowly, learning the landscape of bodies in firelight and shadow, and when he finally made her his wife in truth, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Afterwards they lay tangled together under the quilts, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. Olivia felt changed in some fundamental way, not just by the physical act but by the emotional intimacy of it, by the vulnerability they had shared. She traced idle patterns on his chest, and he ran his fingers through her unbound hair, and neither of them spoke because there were no words adequate to the moment. "The best things come in storms," Samuel said eventually, his voice rough with emotion. "My father said that the day I was born, during the worst thunderstorm Missouri had seen in a decade. My mother used to tell me the story. He said I came into the world howling like the wind, and that he knew right then I would be someone who did not back down from a challenge." "Did he live to see you prove him right?" Olivia asked. "He did. He saw me stand up to a man twice my size when I was 13, saw me work 3 jobs to help support the family after he got injured in the mill. He died knowing I would be all right on my own, though I am not sure he would have guessed I would end up in Montana raising cattle." "I think he would be proud of you," Olivia said. "I think he would be proud of everything you have built here." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "What about your parents? What would they think of all this?" Olivia considered. Her parents had been practical people, her father a clerk and her mother a seamstress, both of them working hard to provide a respectable middle-class life for their daughters. They had valued education and propriety and financial security, and she suspected they would have been horrified by her decision to marry a stranger and move to the frontier. "I think my mother would have worried," she said honestly. "But I also think she would have understood wanting something more than safety. She used to tell us stories about her grandmother who came over from Ireland with nothing but the clothes on her back and worked as a maid until she saved enough to open her own boarding house. My mother was proud of that legacy even though she lived a much quieter life herself. I think she would see this as me honoring that same spirit. And your father? My father would have wanted to meet you first, to take your measure as a man, but I think he would have liked you. He admired people who worked with their hands, who built things." They talked long into the night, sharing memories and dreams and small details of their lives, filling in the gaps that letters could never quite bridge. And when they finally slept, wrapped in each other's arms, Olivia felt a peace she had not known she was searching for. The winter passed slowly, each day bleeding into the next in a routine of work and warmth and growing affection. Olivia learned the rhythms of the ranch, rising before dawn to make breakfast while Samuel went out to tend to the cattle and horses. She learned to make bread from scratch, to render fat for soap, to preserve meat and vegetables for the long months when fresh food was scarce. She learned to card and spin wool, though she was not yet skilled enough to produce anything fine, and she spent her evenings by the fire sewing shirts for Samuel and new curtains for the windows. Samuel taught her to ride, first on his gentlest horse, a gray mare named Patience who lived up to her name. Olivia was terrified at first, certain she would fall and break her neck, but Samuel was patient and encouraging, and after a few weeks she could manage a basic walk and trot. He taught her to shoot as well, both a rifle and a revolver, saying that she needed to know how to defend herself and the ranch if necessary. She proved to be a decent shot, better than Samuel had expected, and he laughed with delight when she hit the target 3 times in a row. Henry became a friend, his initial reserve melting away as he realized Olivia was there to stay. He had worked for Samuel since the beginning and was fiercely loyal, but he also had a mischievous streak and a talent for pranks. He taught Olivia how to play poker properly, with bets and bluffs, and she began to win more often than she lost, much to Samuel's mock dismay. He told her stories of his youth in Texas, of cattle drives and stampedes and nights under stars so thick you could read by their light. In February, a thaw came, and Samuel and Henry spent long days riding the property, checking on the cattle and repairing fences. Olivia often rode out with them, bringing lunch in a basket tied to her saddle, and they would eat together on some windswept hillside with the mountains purple in the distance and the sky so big it hurt to look at. She was learning to love this land, harsh and unforgiving as it was for its beauty and its honesty. There was no pretense here, no social climbing or false politeness. Life was stripped down to its essentials: work and food and warmth and the people you chose to share it with. One day in March, they rode to a neighboring ranch to help with a difficult calving. The rancher, a weathered man named Tom Baker, had a wife named Susan who immediately took Olivia under her wing. Susan was perhaps 35, worn thin by hard work and the loss of 2 children to scarlet fever, but she had a warm smile and a generous spirit. She and Olivia hit it off immediately, and Susan promised to visit once the weather improved. "It is good to have another woman nearby," Susan said. "The winters can be so isolating. You start to forget how to talk to anyone except cows and chickens." "I would welcome the company," Olivia said, "though I confess I have been so busy learning everything that I have hardly had time to feel lonely." "Give it a few years," Susan said, but not unkindly. "There will be times when you want to scream just from the monotony of it all, but there will also be times when you look around and think you are the luckiest woman alive. It balances out eventually." As spring arrived in earnest, the snow melting to reveal the brown grass beneath, Olivia began to feel the first stirrings of new life within her own body. At first she dismissed it as a stomach ailment, but when her monthly courses failed to arrive and the nausea persisted, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant, carrying Samuel's child, and the realization filled her with a complicated mix of joy and terror. She waited until she was certain before telling him. They were sitting outside in the evening, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, and she simply reached over and took his hand and said, "Samuel, I think I am going to have a baby." He went very still and then turned to look at her, his eyes wide. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation, but all the signs are there." For a long moment he just stared at her and she could not read his expression. Then a smile broke across his face like sunrise and he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy." "Olivia, I am so happy I do not have words for it. I did not dare to hope for this so soon. You have given me everything I wanted and more." They told Henry that night, and he shook Samuel's hand and kissed Olivia's cheek, and said he supposed he would have to clean up his language now that there would be a young one around. They celebrated with the last of the whiskey Samuel had been saving for a special occasion, though Olivia only took a small sip, and Henry played the harmonica while Samuel danced Olivia around the room, both of them laughing. The summer was a golden time. Olivia's body changed and swelled with the baby growing inside her, and Samuel was endlessly solicitous, insisting she rest when she wanted to work, bringing her cold water from the well when the heat made her dizzy. Susan Baker visited often, bringing advice and baby clothes her own children had worn, helping Olivia prepare for the birth. The two women became close friends, their bond forged by shared experience and genuine affection. In July, Samuel and Henry drove a portion of the herd to market in Helena, a journey that would take 2 weeks. Samuel was reluctant to leave Olivia, but she insisted she would be fine with Susan checking in on her daily. The money from the cattle sale would see them through the next year and allow them to expand the herd, and it was necessary even if the timing was not ideal. The night before he left, Samuel held Olivia close and whispered promises in the darkness. He would be back as soon as possible. He would bring her something special from Helena, a gift to mark their first year together. He loved her more than he had words to express, and their child would be born into a family built on that love. "I know," Olivia whispered back. "I am not afraid. We will be here waiting when you return." He kissed her then, soft and lingering, and she memorized the feel of him, the taste, the way his hand cradled her face like she was something precious. Then morning came and he rode away with Henry and the cattle, and Olivia stood in the doorway of their home and watched until they disappeared over the horizon. The days passed slowly without Samuel. Olivia kept busy with garden work and preserving the vegetables that were finally ripening, with sewing and cooking and all the 1,000 tasks that filled ranch life. Susan visited every other day, sometimes staying for hours, and Olivia was grateful for the companionship. They talked about everything and nothing, about childbirth and child-rearing, about their husbands and their hopes and their fears. "You ever regret it?" Olivia asked one afternoon as they sat snapping beans on the front porch. "Coming out here, living this life." Susan was quiet for a moment. "I regret some things," she said finally. "I regret that my children are buried in ground so far from where I was born. I regret that my mother never met them before she died. But do I regret marrying Tom and coming to Montana? No. For all its hardships, this life has a freedom that I would not trade. I can ride for miles and see no other person. I can stand outside at night and see stars that city dwellers will never know exist. And I have a partnership with my husband that my friends back east could never understand. We work side by side. He values my opinion. I am not just his wife but his partner in building something that will last. That is how I feel with Samuel," Olivia said, "like we are building something together." "Then you have found what matters," Susan said. "Hold on to that, especially during the hard times, because there will be hard times. Life out here guarantees it." Samuel returned on a hot August afternoon, riding into the yard with a whoop of joy when he saw Olivia waiting on the porch. He swung down from his horse and swept her into his arms despite her swollen belly, spinning her around while she laughed and scolded him to be careful. He looked tired and dusty and wonderful, his face tanned even darker by the sun, and Olivia felt something in her chest expand at the sight of him. "I missed you," she said, cupping his face in her hands. "The house was too quiet without you." "I missed you too. Every single day I thought about turning back, but Henry kept me moving forward. He said you would never forgive me if I gave up a good sale price just because I was lovesick." Samuel grinned. "But we got top dollar for the cattle, and I have enough to expand the herd and fix up the barn and still have some left over. And I brought you this." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. Olivia unwrapped it carefully to find a beautiful shawl, soft wool in a deep blue that reminded her of the Montana sky. It was finer than anything she owned, clearly expensive, and she ran her fingers over it reverently. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "Samuel, you should not have spent so much." "You deserve beautiful things," he said. "And besides, you will need something warm come winter when you are nursing the baby." They went inside and Samuel washed the trail dust away while Olivia prepared supper. And then they sat together, and he told her about the journey, about the long days pushing the cattle and the nights camped under stars, about the city of Helena with its bustling streets and grand buildings, so different from little Silver Ridge. He had bought supplies while in town, including more ammunition and a new rifle and a bolt of cloth for Olivia to make baby clothes, and he had seen a doctor who gave him advice about what to expect during the birth. "The doctor said I should have you come to Helena for the birth," Samuel said, his expression worried. "He said it would be safer with proper medical care. Susan has attended dozens of births and she has agreed to be here," Olivia said. "I would rather have her familiar presence than a strange doctor in a strange city. And besides, I want our child to be born here, in the home we have built together." Samuel looked like he wanted to argue but finally nodded. "All right. But if anything seems wrong, anything at all, I am taking you to Helena whether you like it or not." "Agreed." The baby came in late September on a morning that dawned cold and clear with the first hint of frost on the grass. Olivia woke to cramping pains that grew steadily stronger, and by noon she was in active labor with Susan at her side and Samuel pacing anxiously outside. Henry had been dispatched to the Baker Ranch to let Tom know Susan would be staying as long as necessary, and it was just the three of them in the house as Olivia labored to bring new life into the world. It was hard, harder than she had imagined even with Susan's warnings. The pain was enormous, overwhelming, and there were moments when she thought she could not bear another second. But Susan coached her through it with steady encouragement and cool cloths for her forehead. And eventually, as the sun was setting in a blaze of color outside the window, Olivia gave one final push, and the baby slipped free into Susan's waiting hands. "It is a boy," Susan said, her voice thick with emotion. "A fine, healthy boy." The baby's cry filled the room, lusty and strong, and Olivia felt tears streaming down her face. A boy. She had a son. They had a son. Susan cleaned the baby quickly, and then placed him in Olivia's arms, and she looked down at the tiny red face, the dark hair plastered to his skull, the impossibly small fingers that wrapped around her thumb, and felt her heart crack open with a love so fierce it was almost frightening. "Samuel," she called out, her voice weak but happy. "Come meet your son." The door burst open and Samuel rushed in, his face pale, his eyes wild. He stopped at the side of the bed and stared down at the baby in Olivia's arms, and she watched emotions flicker across his face too fast to name. Then he reached out one trembling hand and touched the baby's cheek with a finger. "He is so small," Samuel whispered. "He is perfect," Olivia said. "He is perfect," Samuel agreed. He leaned down and kissed Olivia's forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You are perfect, thank you. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas, after Samuel's father, with the middle name James after Olivia's father. Little Thomas Harrison, born September 28, 1885 on a ranch in Montana Territory to parents who loved him before they ever saw his face. Susan stayed for 3 days, helping Olivia learn to nurse and care for the baby, and Samuel barely left their side, staring at his son with an expression of wonder that never quite faded. The first months of Thomas's life were exhausting and joyful in equal measure. Olivia was constantly tired from broken sleep and the demands of nursing, but every time she looked at her son's face, she felt a surge of fierce, protective love. Samuel was a devoted father, taking Thomas in his arms whenever he could, talking to him in a low voice about the ranch and the horses, and all the things they would do together when Thomas was older. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving intricate patterns into the wood, and he hung a mobile above it made from carved wooden horses that turned slowly in the breeze. Winter came again, their second winter together, and it was harder in some ways with a baby to care for but also warmer because their family was now complete. They took turns walking Thomas when he cried in the night. They marveled over each new development, each smile and sound and gesture. Henry was utterly besotted with the baby, carving toys and making funny faces to provoke giggles, and Olivia often came into the room to find the grizzled cowhand sitting by the fire with Thomas in his arms, singing old trail songs in a surprisingly sweet voice. Spring brought new calves and new challenges. Thomas was crawling now, getting into everything, and Olivia had to watch him constantly to keep him safe. Samuel built a fence around the porch so Thomas could play outside without wandering off, and they spent long afternoons there together. Olivia sewing or churning butter while Thomas examined rocks and sticks and anything else he could get his hands on. In April, Susan Baker arrived with news that made Olivia embrace her friend with joy. Susan was pregnant again, due in late fall, and though she was cautious in her happiness given her past losses, Olivia could see the hope in her eyes. "Our children will grow up together," Olivia said. "They will be friends like we are." "I hope so," Susan said. "I hope so very much." The summer was long and hot and busy. Samuel expanded the herd as planned and hired an additional hand, a young man named David Webb who was learning the ranching trade. Olivia's days were full of work, caring for Thomas and the house and the large garden she had planted, but she had never been happier. This life was hard, but it was hers, built by her own hands and Samuel's, and there was deep satisfaction in that. On their second wedding anniversary, Samuel took Olivia on a picnic to a high meadow where wildflowers bloomed in a riot of color. Henry watched Thomas for the afternoon, and it was just the two of them on horseback, riding through country that still took Olivia's breath away with its stark beauty. They spread a blanket and ate bread and cheese and apples, and Samuel produced a bottle of wine he had purchased on his last trip to Silver Ridge. 2 years, he said, raising his tin cup in a toast. 2 years since you arrived in a blizzard and changed my life forever. The best things come in storms, Olivia said, echoing his father's words back to him. The very best things, Samuel agreed. He set down his cup and took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the simple gold band he had placed there 2 years ago. "I need you to know something, Olivia. I need you to know that these have been the happiest years of my life. Before you came, I had the ranch and I had work, and I told myself that was enough. But it was not enough. You and Thomas have made everything worthwhile. You have made a house into a home." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. "I feel the same way. I was so lost before I came here. I did not even know how lost I was. But you found me anyway, or I found you. We found each other." They made love there in the meadow under the vast Montana sky, slow and sweet, with the sound of birdsong around them and the scent of wildflowers in the air. Afterwards they lay tangled together on the blanket, Olivia's head on Samuel's chest, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her back, and neither of them spoke because there was nothing that needed saying. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Thomas grew from baby to toddler to a sturdy little boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. Susan's baby was born healthy, a girl they named Mary, and true to Olivia's prediction, the two children became fast friends. The ranch prospered, the herd growing, improvements made to the house and barn, hired hands coming and going, but Henry always staying, a constant presence and beloved member of the family. In the winter of 1889, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. The news was not unexpected but still joyous, and Samuel swept her into his arms and danced her around the kitchen while Thomas, now 3 years old, clapped his hands and demanded to dance too. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Olivia knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was simply too busy chasing after Thomas to dwell on discomfort. The second baby, a girl they named Caroline, was born in July 1890 during a thunderstorm that shook the house with its fury. Susan attended the birth again, and Thomas was kept occupied by Henry in the barn, coming in afterwards to meet his baby sister with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. But within days, he was fiercely protective of Caroline, insisting on helping with everything, and Olivia's heart expanded once more to accommodate this new depth of love. With 2 children, the house felt too small, so Samuel and Henry and David spent the fall building an addition, 2 new bedrooms so Thomas could have his own space and the baby would not wake him with her crying. It was finished just as the first snow fell, and Olivia walked through the expanded house with wonder. This was truly a home now, not just a building but a place where a family was growing, where memories were being made that would last generations. The years continued to unspool, marked by small triumphs and occasional setbacks. A harsh winter in 1892 that killed a dozen head of cattle. A summer of good rain that saw the grass grow tall and green. Thomas starting his lessons with Olivia, learning to read and write and cipher at the kitchen table. Caroline taking her first steps, saying her first words, growing from baby to little girl with her mother's quick mind and her father's stubborn determination. More neighbors arrived in the territory, filing claims and starting their own ranches, and the community around Silver Ridge grew. A new school was built and Thomas attended when he turned 6, riding in with Samuel once a week to spend the day learning alongside a dozen other children. Olivia sometimes went along, using the trip to town to buy supplies and visit with Martha Chen, who had become a good friend over the years. In 1895, Montana achieved statehood, and Silver Ridge celebrated with a party that brought together people from 50 miles in every direction. There was a dance in the evening with a fiddle band and tables laden with food, and Olivia danced with Samuel until her feet hurt and her face ached from smiling. Thomas was 10 years old now, tall and gangly, already helping with the ranch work in meaningful ways. Caroline was 5, bright and fearless, equally comfortable on a horse or with a book in her lap. Olivia looked at her family gathered together and felt a gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, pulling her close as they swayed to the music. "I am thinking that I am blessed," Olivia said. "I am thinking that 11 years ago I answered an advertisement in a newspaper and got on a train to a place I had never seen to marry a man I had never met, and it was the best decision I ever made. Even though you almost died in a blizzard." Samuel teased, "Especially because of that. Because you rode out into the storm to find me. Because you brought me home and took care of me and gave me a chance to choose this life with full knowledge of what it entailed. Because you have been exactly the partner you promised to be in your letters." Samuel's expression turned serious. "You have been so much more than I ever imagined. You came here expecting to be a rancher's wife, and you became that, but you also became the heart of this family, the center that holds us all together. Henry says you are the best thing that ever happened to this ranch, and he is right." They kissed there on the dance floor surrounded by their friends and neighbors, and someone whistled and someone else laughed, but Olivia did not care. Let them see how much she loved her husband. Let them see the bond that had been forged in that terrible, beautiful storm 11 years ago, and tempered by every season since. The turn of the century came and went, marked by celebration and reflection. The new century brought changes, modern conveniences slowly making their way even to rural Montana. The railroad expanded its lines, and Silver Ridge got a new depot. Telephone wires were strung between some of the larger ranches. An automobile appeared in town, a noisy contraption that frightened the horses and fascinated the children. Through it all, the Harrison Ranch endured and prospered. Thomas grew into a young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's quick intelligence and a way with horses that was almost magical. Caroline was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, always asking questions, always wanting to know more. She learned to read early and devoured every book she could get her hands on, and Samuel built shelves in her room to hold the growing collection. In 1903, Olivia discovered she was pregnant once more, a surprise given that she was now 42 years old and had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. The pregnancy was harder than the previous two, her body older and less resilient, and Samuel worried constantly. But Olivia had brought 2 healthy children into the world, and she trusted her body to do it again. The baby, another boy they named Henry after their loyal friend who had passed away the previous winter, was born in February 1904 during a blizzard that reminded Olivia forcefully of the storm that had brought her to Montana all those years ago. She labored through the night while wind howled around the house and snow piled high against the walls, and when Henry finally arrived just before dawn, Samuel held his youngest son and said with tears in his eyes, "The best things come in storms. Always have, always will." Olivia was slower to recover from this birth, her body taking months to fully heal. Samuel took on more of the household tasks, and Thomas and Caroline pitched in without complaint, the family pulling together as they always had. By summer, Olivia felt herself again, and she spent warm afternoons on the porch with baby Henry in her arms and Samuel beside her, watching Thomas work with the horses in the corral and Caroline practice her roping on a wooden post. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had stayed in Philadelphia?" Samuel asked one evening. Olivia considered. It was hard to imagine now, hard to picture a version of herself who had never come west, never married Samuel, never had these children. "Sometimes," she said honestly, "but that life feels like it belonged to someone else, someone smaller and more afraid. I am not that person anymore." "No, you are not. You are Olivia Harrison, rancher's wife, mother of 3, crack shot and expert horsewoman. You are the woman who survived a blizzard and built a life in one of the hardest places on earth. You are extraordinary." "I am ordinary," Olivia corrected gently. "But I have lived an extraordinary life, and that is because of you, because you saw something in my letter that made you write back. Because you rode out into a storm to save me, because you have loved me well for 20 years. 20 years, Samuel repeated, shaking his head in wonder. It seems impossible and also like no time at all. They sat together in the fading light, surrounded by the life they had built, and Olivia felt a contentment that went bone deep. This was what she had been searching for all those years ago when she answered that advertisement, though she had not known it then. Not just a husband or a home, but a place where she belonged utterly, where she was valued and loved and needed. A place where her strength was recognized and her dreams were possible. The years continued their steady march forward. Thomas turned 18 and took on more responsibility with the ranch, working side by side with his father and the hired hands. Talk began of him starting his own place eventually, expanding the family holdings, but for now he was content to learn everything Samuel could teach him. Caroline, at 13, announced her intention to become a teacher, inspired by the woman who had taught at the Silver Ridge School. She studied diligently, already helping her little brother Henry learn his letters and numbers. Henry, the youngest, was a quiet child but with hidden depths. He loved animals with a passion that surprised everyone. nursing injured birds back to health, and befriending every stray dog that wandered onto the ranch. Samuel said he would make a fine veterinarian someday if that was what he chose, and Olivia loved that her husband encouraged their children to pursue their own dreams rather than simply following the path expected of them. In 1910, Samuel and Olivia celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together 4 generations of families who had settled the Montana Territory. Martha Chen was there, now in her 70s, but still sharp as ever. Tom and Susan Baker came with their grown children and grandchildren. David Webb, who had started as a hired hand and now owned his own small ranch, attended with his wife and their young family. The house and yard were full of people, full of laughter and music and the kind of deep community that took decades to build. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had gone home, Olivia and Samuel sat on the porch steps watching the stars. Thomas was walking out with a girl from a neighboring ranch, and they could see the 2 figures silhouetted against the barn. Caroline was inside putting Henry to bed, reading him a story in the dramatic voice she used that made him giggle. The sounds of family surrounded them, comfortable and beloved. "You remember what I said to you that first day?" Samuel asked. "After I pulled you from the wreckage, you said a lot of things," Olivia replied. "Most of them I could barely hear over the wind." "I said the best things come in storms. My father's words, but I finally understood them that day. Because you came to me in a storm, literally and figuratively. You were this incredible thing that appeared out of the worst weather I had seen in years, and you changed everything." Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder. "You changed everything for me too. I was so lost before I found you. I did not even know what I was looking for, but it was this. It was you and this place and our family and this life we built together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Samuel said, "I want you to know something, Olivia. I want you to know that every single day for the past 26 years, I have woken up grateful. Grateful that you answered my advertisement. Grateful that you got on that train. Grateful that you survived that blizzard. Grateful that you chose me, over and over again, even when things were hard." "The choosing was never difficult," Olivia said softly. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done." Samuel turned to look at her, his face illuminated by the light spilling from the windows. He was 52 years old now, his dark hair threaded with silver, lines etched around his eyes from years of squinting into sun and wind. But to Olivia he was as handsome as he had been that day he pulled her from the wreckage, and infinitely more dear. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you more than I have words to express." "I know," Olivia said. "I have always known, and I love you the same way." They kissed there on the porch steps, a kiss that held 26 years of partnership and passion and profound affection. Inside, Caroline's voice rose and fell as she read to Henry. In the distance, Thomas's laughter drifted on the evening breeze. The ranch spread out around them, acres of land they had worked and fought for and made their own. The mountains rose purple against the darkening sky, ancient and enduring, bearing witness to the life they had built. As the years continued to pass, the Harrison Ranch became something of a landmark in the region. 3 generations now worked the land together, with Thomas and his wife Ellen living in a house they built just over the hill, their own children learning to ride and rope. Caroline went to normal school in Helena and returned to teach at Silver Ridge, living at home and riding in each day. Henry, at 16, was apprenticing with the veterinarian in town, his gentle way with animals making him a natural. Samuel and Olivia grew older together, their bodies showing the wear of hard years but their spirits undimmed. They took walks together in the evenings when the work was done, holding hands like young sweethearts. They still shared the same bed they had shared for decades, still reached for each other in the night, still found comfort and joy in each other's presence. In the summer of 1916, the whole family gathered to celebrate Samuel and Olivia's 32nd anniversary. There were grandchildren now, 5 of them, ranging from 10 years old to just 3 months, and the house rang with their voices. A long table was set up outside under the trees Samuel had planted years ago, laden with food prepared by many hands. The afternoon was warm and golden, perfect in the way that Montana summer days could be. After the meal, Thomas stood and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, "who taught me what it means to build a life worth living. Who showed me that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every single day. Who have given our family roots and wings in equal measure. May we all be so fortunate in our partnerships." Everyone drank to that, and then Caroline stood as well. "To the best parents anyone could ask for," she said. "Who encouraged my dreams even when they were different from what was expected. Who taught me to be brave and kind and true to myself. Who have created a legacy that will endure for generations." Little Henry, no longer so little at 12 years old, simply said, "I love you both. Thank you for everything." Olivia felt tears streaming down her face and did not bother to wipe them away. This was what mattered, this gathering of people she loved more than life itself, this family that had grown from 2 strangers who met in a storm. Samuel's hand found hers under the table and she squeezed back, no words necessary. As the sun set in a blaze of color and the first stars appeared, the family began to disperse. Thomas and his family headed back to their house over the hill. Caroline went inside to practice the lesson she would teach the next day. Henry disappeared to the barn to check on a mare about to foal. And Samuel and Olivia were left alone in the gathering darkness, sitting together on the porch swing Samuel had built years ago. 32 years, Olivia said softly. "Where did the time go?" "Into every moment we have lived," Samuel replied. "Into every day we have worked and every night we have held each other. Into raising our children and building this place and becoming who we are now. The time did not disappear. It became our life." "What a life it has been," Olivia said. "What an extraordinary, beautiful, difficult, wonderful life." They rocked gently on the swing, the chains creaking a familiar rhythm. From the barn came the sound of Henry talking to the horse in his low, soothing voice. From the house drifted the smell of bread Caroline had set to rise for tomorrow. The night air was cool and clean, scented with the grass that was finally growing tall after a wet spring. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and was answered by another. "Do you ever wonder what the woman in Philadelphia would think if she could see you now?" Samuel asked. Olivia smiled. "I think she would be amazed. I think she would hardly recognize herself in the woman I became, but I also think she would be proud. She took a chance on something unknown, and it turned out better than she could have imagined." "I am glad she took that chance," Samuel said. "I am glad she was brave enough to board that train. I am glad the storm brought her to me." "The best things come in storms," Olivia said, the words familiar and true, a mantra they had lived by for more than 3 decades. "They always have and they always will." They sat together as the stars wheeled overhead, as they had sat together countless times before, and would sit together countless times more, God willing. They were older now, their bodies marked by time and work, but the connection between them was as strong as ever, forged in hardship and tempered by joy. They had built something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. And when they finally rose and went inside, Samuel's arm around Olivia's shoulders and her arm around his waist, They did so knowing that they had lived the kind of love story that most people only dream about. A love that was tested and proven true. A love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger on the other side. The best things come in storms, Samuel's father had said, and he was right. The very best things, always and forever.